Hi, everybody. I'm Tamara Adlin, and my company is called Adlin Inc. And I am here today to talk about personas. We are going to start off with what personas are, where they came from, a brief history of personas, why everybody got so excited about them, and a little bit on why everybody got a little less excited about them after everybody started trying them and had varying amounts of luck over the last 20 years. I'm still a huge believer in personas. I do a method now that I call alignment personas, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, why I'm excited about it, and an overview of how I do that in a workshop so that you can start to understand the process and see how you can try to do it too. So let's get started. First of all, this is me. This is my new website on the right-hand side that you can see here. And I have also co-authored 2 books on personas. In 2005, the Persona Lifecycle, Keeping People in Mind Throughout Product Design was launched or came out or was published. And I co-authored that with John Pruitt, who was at Microsoft at the time and now is a honcho at Dell. And still a dear friend, of course. And then in 2010, we did a shorter version called The Essential Persona Lifecycle, which included a little bit of new thinking as well. I decided that after working at getting my master's degree in technical communication, and now that department is human-centered design and engineering at the University of Washington in 1996, I worked at a series of startups. Then I went to Amazon for 3 years from 2002 until 2005, which was an amazing experience. And then I ran screaming from Amazon when the book came out and started doing consulting. And since then, I've been doing consulting nonstop ever since. And I am an independent. That means that I don't have employees, and that's on purpose. And I really love working with early stage startups to help them create a culture around user-centered design and products that people love, and also with larger companies that want to behave a bit more like startups and get some fresh and innovative thinking to a point where it can actually get out the door with their products as well. And right now, as I tape this, I am also the Chief Product Officer for Blockchain Ventures, which is a venture fund in the blockchain space, which is providing all sorts of new, fascinating things and headaches and everything in between. So let's start off with what personas are. And to do that, I'm going to just start you off in 1999 when Alan Cooper wrote a book called The Inmates Are Running the Asylum. Why high-tech products drive us crazy and how to stop the insanity. This book was railing against something that needed to be railed against, which was that the people who by default were building and designing technical products at the time were the engineers, because they were the ones who had their hands on the keyboard and were writing all the code. The problem with that, according to Cooper, is that engineers don't think like regular human beings. And he's right. In order to be a great engineer, you have to be thinking down in the ones and zeros and objects and the way things talk to each other. And that's not the same types of skills that you need if you are focusing on how do we make a product that makes sense to regular human beings who are not necessarily technical. In the middle of this book, where he was making this great point, were chapters 9, 10, and 11. And they introduced the idea of personas, which he defined as not real people. These are hypothetical archetypes of actual users defined with significant rigor and precision. And these few words in those couple of chapters turned the tables in the field of UX in a really fascinating way and got everybody all excited about the idea of creating these fake people that could help everyone design technical products that were easier to use and that people liked a lot more. So what happened? Oh, this is a further description. They're archetypes of important characteristics. They capture differences that make a difference. So what's important about the differences between your customers or your users? It's probably may not be how old they are or how much money they make. It may be more like things that relate to how used they are to technology or how comfortable they are with a mobile phone or what they're trying to do right at this particular moment. So those are differences that make a difference. And as I said, everybody got all excited about it. Everybody in the field of UX in 2000 was like, yes, personas, we're going to do personas. And everybody started trying personas and put these beautiful posters up on the wall and started talking about the names of personas. And then about a year later, everybody was talking about why personas were failing. This is such a great idea. And we love it so much. And it just makes so much intuitive sense that if we started talking about people instead of bullet points full of data, that we'd be able to build better products. Well, why weren't people using the personas? It was a big question. And here are some of the things that started coming up. Well, are they supposed to be for marketing, or are they supposed to be for product design? These are two different things, like the differences that make a difference if you're trying to get somebody interested in a product or get their eyeballs to your website are different than if you're trying to get them to do things once they've engaged with your product or your website. And it was a little confusing to people which ones were going to be more relevant for businesses. They were being created from the bottom up, which data-driven personas are supposed to be, right? You're supposed to gather a whole bunch of data and create these personas. Unfortunately, at the time, there weren't any good instructions on how to do personas. You could take courses, but if you didn't take a course, there wasn't a how-to out there. Even Cooper's book, it basically said, gather data, find patterns, create personas. And then people started realizing that creating personas this way was pretty expensive, took a lot of time, and ended up in these gorgeous posters on the wall that people tended to ignore. So then a lot more thinking started to go into personas, including my own and John's. And in 2004, we had the pleasure of talking to Don Norman about some of the work we were doing in what we then called assumptions or ad hoc personas. And this idea that, well, isn't what we're really trying to do to generate empathy among the entire team and get them to think more like human beings and with each other in that way. And Don Norman ended up writing this article on ad hoc personas and empathetic focus way back in 2004. In the meantime, John and I were also working on the Persona Lifecycle book, and a whole bunch of other books were under development as well, including The User is Always Right and Alan Cooper's About Phase 3, which had more instructions about personas. Our own Persona Lifecycle came out. Personas and User-Focused Design came out later. So there's been a lot of academic thinking about personas, and now there are a bunch of different ways that you can get instructions for how to create them yourself. But personas are a solution, and I want to start with the problem, because I love personas, but I still really understand and am interested in why they so often fail. So what is the problem that personas are supposed to solve? Well, here's our job as user-centered design people or product design people. We're supposed to go from something arcane that we think has value, like Of Mice and Men is a classic book on the left. And believe it or not, this is where the phrase, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. It's from our little arcane poem here about Mousie. Thou art know thy lane, in proving foresight may be vain. The best laid schemes, O mice and men, gang off the glay, and lay us not but grief and pain for promised joy. This arcane statement has something very valuable to regular human beings, which is translated into the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. And not only do we have to translate these things, but in this field that we're in today, we're trying to create products or websites out of things that are technical and interesting and we think have value to users. So we'd love to get from mice and men to the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. And maybe this is miceandmen.com. Maybe it's a website for project planning tools that work when nothing else is working. And a basic site like this might have something like a mouse login, a men login, and contact us. This wouldn't be such a bad result, I don't think. But what really happens when we try to launch miceandmen.com? This is what happens. We end up launching something that all of a sudden has a fancy graphic in the front. And there's an enterprise edition that somebody decided. And we got to have online demos. Also, there needs to be a white paper, right? Because our competition had a white paper. And then we end up writing things like this description arc of our company, that where we optimize team dynamics across a distributed content knowledge worker workforce while prioritizing business objectives collaboratively. We launch this kind of stuff all the time. We want to launch something clear and simple, but we end up with this. And anybody who's working on a project right now, if you're trying to redesign something that already exists, this is the kind of thing that you're looking at. Something that has somehow gotten crazy and doesn't really make sense to anyone. And nobody really knows why or how it evolved or devolved into something that looks like this. The reason this happens, of course, it becomes a problem with these things, but it's not a design problem. Often companies have great designers, well trained, have gone through great programs in design and user experience, right? They have these methods to do user testing. Maybe they even have great content specialists, right? So the problems aren't arising from these departments or these professionals who are designers or UX professionals or content people. But even if these great content people exist in a company, they aren't being able to get their work done. There's a communication problem in the company that ruins the best laid plans of design, UX, and content. That's what fascinates me. And when you look for a communication problem in a company, if you're an old person like me and have been doing this for a long time, then you start to swim upstream. You start to look for, where is the source of this communication problem? Maybe it's the stakeholders, maybe it's the project owners. But if you swim all the way back upstream, what do you find? You find executives. And when you find executives, you find some very interesting stuff that starts to explain why products that their companies release are confusing and make no sense. What we think we hear from executives, or what they try to tell us that they try to convey, that their goals are super duper clear, their priorities for the entire company are clear, and for the project you're working on are clear, that the resources they have are well allocated, all of the processes are honed, especially in larger organizations, and that teams are aligned. Same thing happens in startups. It's just that they're so much smaller that they say, of course we're all on the same page because there's only 4 of us, or what have you. But what executives are really thinking and not saying out loud is a bunch of stuff that doesn't match what they project out there in the world. Really, if you ask 2 of them, they're going to think the goals are 2 different sets of things, right? Or one of them's not going to even know what the goals are, and certainly can't raise their hand in a meeting and say, I don't know what our goals are. The CEO is probably thinking about a board meeting that's coming up and questions and problems that need to happen there. The CTO is worrying about getting an MVP launched, right? The chief of revenue is worried about sales. Someone may be worried about adopting a cat, and completely distracted. And at least 1 or 2 of them are feeling pretty frustrated that everything keeps changing every time they meet, and they're going to lose their mind if it keeps happening this way. The inevitable result of all of this is executive misalignment. Here's all those different executives thinking all their different thoughts. And even though they're smiling at the camera and all looking in the same direction, they're not able to pull the company in the same direction. Because if you ask any one of them at any given time what it is that they want you to be building, they're going to tell you something slightly different. Or they're going to say, just build it, I'll know it when I see it. What we really need from executives is a pretty simple set of answers to a pretty simple set of questions. We want to know, what do you want us to build, for which users and customers? We want to know, how is it different and better from all the other solutions that are out there? Why our customers should care about these differences, right? If it's just slightly different because it has a better processor, if it's faster, but in an imperceptible way, do customers really care, for example? And we also want to know how well nailed it, because we're all going to have a performance review at the end of the year, and we want to know what numbers will get us a raise, right? So how will we know we did a good job? What we really want is executive alignment. And if we have that alignment, if we have clarity from the top, it trickles all the way through the organization to the project teams. And I know I started talking about personas, and I'm getting to the personas. I'm getting to the problem that I think personas can and should be solving, and that data-driven personas can't solve. We want the executives to all be aligned, and what we want them to be aligned around is users, right? Because if there's one thing that makes sense for an organization, it's thinking about their users and their customers. But we're terrible about thinking about users and talking about users. If you were to ask executives who the users are, mice, men, mouse and men teams, super users, enterprise, SMB. Everybody is terrible about talking about users. So if we're trying to align around users, how can we do that if we're all terrible at talking about it? If we have these terms that are all over the place, like content pros or strategists, new users, my mom, people who make $125,000 a year, unregistered users. If this is how we're talking about who our users and our customers are, How can we get aligned around that? There's nothing to align around because these words, all of them are correct, but none of them are helpful. What we really need, what we really want is crystal clarity. We want to know who are we trying to, and we want everybody in the executive team to agree, who are we building this thing for? Which users, which customers, who are they? What motivates them? What problems do they have in their own word? And which ones do you want us to focus on? As user experience professionals, as strategy professionals, as designers, as content people, if we know the answers to these questions, we can build just about anything. As long as we know what you want us to build and design, we can nail it. And this is what we're going for. This is what we need in organizations to enable the great people we've hired to build really great products and experiences. All right, well, typically, if we want to go for crystal clarity on anything, we go for data, right? And because data is where crystal clarity comes from, right? Well, maybe, maybe not. I put this chaotic slide in here because what I've done now is I've kept everything the same, but I've added a bunch of data behind it, right? And this is what we tend to do. Every company thinks that what we need is more data. Turns out almost every company I've ever interacted with as a professional consultant or as a consumer probably has more data than they can use. And yet they constantly go out and they try to get more. And then they sort of hogtie themselves because they say, well, we can't make decisions until we have the data. But then they have the data and they don't know what to do with it. So actually, when you really look at it, data doesn't have a place to land. It doesn't have a place where it shows up at the door and then suddenly you're like, aha, I know the answer to this question that I've had for ages and ages. So what do? Data doesn't always work, right? It just doesn't. And we think that it does. So what do we do if we need crystal clarity and we know that companies are biased towards going and gathering data, but we also know it doesn't work? One of the things that we have done in the past is we have translated that data into personas. Personas. And here she is rolling her eyes because when you get out there in the world and you talk about personas at any big established company or even some young ones, they will roll their eyes, right? People out there think that personas won't solve problems, they won't work, they're expensive and a pain in the ass, and no one knows how to make good ones. And the reason is because that's the experience that has happened over the past 20 years. There are very few super duper successful persona efforts out there, but there are a lot of personas out there that cost a lot of money, cost a lot of time, people were very excited about, but then they sort of fizzled or died on the vine, or the executives didn't accept them. I agree that personas are problematic, but I agree with some important caveats. I don't think personas solve the right problems, right? Data-driven personas don't necessarily solve the right problems. They don't work unless stakeholders use them. So we all create them and we hope that designers and strategists and engineers will use them. But the truth is, unless the stakeholders and the executives use them, they're not going to work overall. They're expensive and a pain in the ass if you start with data, right? Because then data is always expensive and data is always a pain in the ass. And we didn't know how to make good ones until now. And I'm a little biased at my own process, but I don't care. It's my presentation. I can be biased if I want. Traditional personas transfer piles of data into a set of fake people that we can use to design our products. But I don't think we need a pile of data and a set of fake people that only the people who created the personas understand fully. I think what we really want is executive alignment. I think executive alignment is a bigger problem than lack of data, or the lack of executive alignment is a bigger problem than lack of data. And that there is a version of personas that can help create that executive alignment, and that these alignment personas can be used as hypotheses that will enable you to create data-driven personas if you want to. In the United States, when we're taught science in 7th grade, we're taught before you do any research, you do what? You create a hypothesis. When we go out and create personas using data or collect data for any reason in business, we tend not to create a hypothesis first. So my perspective is what we really need, even more than data, is clarity from the executive level. We need alignment from the executive level. And there's a way of creating alignment personas that can force that alignment and clarity, and then gives data a place to land and a way for data to be effective if you decide to gather it to validate your personas afterwards. So let's see how that works. Well, first, let's look at an example of an alignment persona. This is Hassan, help. And he is an alignment persona that was created for an organization called the World Intellectual Property Organization, which is a division of the United Nations. It's a ginormous organization and website that helps everyone on the planet with intellectual property, copyright, ownership of ideas. And this is one of the alignment personas we created together. It has a picture, it has a name, it has a description of Hassan, it has how we can help Hassan as the World Intellectual Property Organization, his wants and needs, and a quote that identifies him. My business is under attack. I don't understand what is happening. He's just one of several personas we created at WIPO. So let's talk about how to create alignment personas and why they can be so valuable. And I think we can create them in 5 conversations. A few more steps than that, but 5 basic conversations. Here are the 5 conversations of the alignment persona workshop. Conversation number 1, I call Let's Play a Game. And this is really about creating business goals, and we'll dive into that. Conversation number 2, pretend you're a building. We're going to identify who is at the front door of your building and why are they there. Conversation number 3 is get needy. It's identifying the wants and needs that are prevalent in the people who are showing up to use your product or service. Number 4 is personify. That's turning all of this stuff that we've done into personas. And number 5 is prioritization or pick the winners. Let's dive in and see how it works. Step and conversation number 1 is let's play a game. Business goals. Let's talk about business goals. You know, every time I do alignment personas with a team, the first step is always creating business goals. And almost every single time they tell me, we don't need to create business goals. We already have them. And I say, send them on over. And I either get ones that aren't very specific or that are old, or they can't seem to find the most recent drafts. So what I've come to do now is to say, well, you may have your business goals, but we're going to re-articulate them in a format that I call business goals Mad Libs, because Mad Libs is this fun game where you just replace certain words in certain ways. Let's take a look. And well, wait, let's talk about why business goals are magical, because we've got this sparkly unicorn here. Business goals are magical because they are never inappropriate to ask for. This is especially important for people getting started in the worlds of design or user experience or product. It's never going to get you in trouble to ask for measurable business goals for the project that you're working on. But you have to understand that they never exist. Why don't they exist? Because what typically happens in organizations is that there's this big goal setting process that usually happens at the beginning of the year. And all the executives get together, and maybe there's an offsite and they set these goals or OKRs or KPIs or whatever. And they can do a great job of that. And they can create we'll know if we were successful if this number changes this much. But the problem is that anytime more than one executive, more than 2 executives are together in a room, anytime after that original goal setting, something will change slightly, but nobody will write it down, right? Because things are always changing. Competitors are doing new things, or, there's new rules or regulations or new compliance things that a company has to worry about. So goals always have to shift a little bit. But there aren't really good mechanisms in most companies to enable those goals to shift in a visible way, because they're usually written down once and then they're considered done. And then everybody sort of ignores the fact that that document they created is now kind of obsolete. The question I always have about business goals is, what numbers do you want to change and by how much do you want to change them? And I call them business goals, but you can call them whatever works for you. You can call them product goals. You can call them user experience goals. You can call them design goals. Sometimes you really have to tread lightly around political words like business, but you do have to, all of us have to get much better at speaking the language of business, which is about numbers, about metrics, about the amount things have to change for the business to succeed. So these are some examples of business goal Mad Libs. And here, let's pretend that we're working on a website that is maybe for a publication that is in a particular area. Like it's a publication for people who race horses or something. I don't know, right? So we can imagine that the business goals that might be associated with this website or our Of Mice and Men website, which is all about all for product, people who make products, that we might want to increase. We start with the word increase or decrease, right? And then we have an important metric. And a metric is something you can measure. So here are some important metrics: visitors who subscribe, time on site, subscription cancellations. And the secret about metrics like this is there are lists of them out there. Anybody can go find lists of metrics for websites, for content websites, for transactional websites, they're just out there, like important KPIs for your business or metrics for your website or whatever they are. There's lists of them. So go pick the ones that you think are important for you. Then there's an amount and it has an actual number there. So in this case, visitors who subscribe, we have to increase that by 20%. Time on site by 50%, subscription cancellations by 80%. And then there's a time period within 5 months, 6 months of redesign, 6 months of redesign. Now let's talk about each one of these. In fact, let's zoom in on the amount. It's very important to have a physical number here, not a little or significantly or anything like that. And the reason is, no company is going to hit a number like 20% or 50% or 80% exactly. But by forcing an amount, here's what ends up happening. You discover that one executive thinks that we need to increase the number of visitors who subscribe by 80%. And one of them thinks it'd be enough if we just did 5%. And one of them thinks it should be 300% or we should all go home. My point as an outside consultant, or your point as an inside person, should be, I don't care which one you choose. I just care that you all agree that it's around 20% versus one of you thinking it's 80, one of you thinking it's 5, and one of you thinking it's 300. So when you first write these, what's interesting is that you're going to get that wide variety of answers, and the goal is to bring it into something that everyone can agree on. And the time at the end is interesting just because executives are smart, but they're also dumb. And so we have to remind them that changes don't happen immediately. Needles don't move immediately. And so they're going to have to wait a little bit for these numbers to change. And then what we want to do is prioritize those. And that's something that the business stakeholders, the executives, your boss, your grandboss, your great-grandboss, they're going to have to do this. And it may take them a while, and you may have to push it a little bit. And that's because it's not, being an executive doesn't give you magical superpowers, even though we'd like to think it does. These are hard questions that you're asking them to debate and consider, and it might take them a little while. Okay, second conversation. Pretend you're a building. What's this all about? You're building something. You're creating something, a product, a service, a website, something. I want you to pretend that it's a building, right? And your users, your customers are the people who are going to show up at your front door. This set of conversation is all about, who do people think are showing up at the front door? Who are they? And there's 2 steps in this second conversation. The first step is to write down all the words for users that any organization is currently using to describe their users. So it takes about 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and you just want to get, there's no wrong answer here. It's just any word for user or customer that's floating around the organization, you want to write it down. Mice, men, teams, writers, content strategists, old school content person, a loyal user, a lapsed subscriber, a website specialist, a freelancer. People just start to shout these out. And you usually end up with maybe about this many, maybe even more. And what you're starting to do is get all of the old stuff out into the light where you can see it. And then you want to go on to the second part of the who's at the front door conversation. And luckily, we get to use sticky notes, and everybody knows how important it is to use sticky notes if you're in the world of UX and product design. And here, what you want to do is you want to ask everybody to use these words for users as a cheat sheet, and then write down as many descriptions of specific people as they possibly can. An agency exec who wants a 5-minute overview of everything. A journalist who wants to write an article on new media trends. A subscriber who reads our news section every day. A PR pro looking for ideas on how to handle the challenges of COVID. This takes exactly 20 minutes. Everybody always thinks it's going to take forever. And there certainly are ways to do this using remote tools. And that's what you want to do. And then you want to get them all out where you can see them. And this is an important moment for everybody, because this many ideas about who our users and customers are is a problem. And now you can see the problem. No wonder our products are coming out and they're not delightful to use, because we're really scattered in the way that we think about who's going to be using them. Now we're ready for our third conversation, which is get needy. In the third conversation, we're going to reorganize our yellow sticky notes. We're going to use pink sticky notes. And in those pink sticky notes there's one rule. They all have to start with the words I want or I need. And we could debate about what the differences between the words want and need all we want, but really it doesn't matter, whatever's easiest. So the goal is to have the entire group that you're working with take those yellow sticky notes and create some nice little columns here. For example, I need a quick overview of all the news. I want to stay up to date on everything related to X. I need info on a very specific or timely topic. It's a little tricky to organize this kind of workshop, but luckily I'm around to teach you. So you can look forward to that. Now you have the pink stickies, which are the I want, I need stickies. Oops. And you have transitioned from thinking about users, which are the yellow stickies, sort of descriptions of who's there, why they're there, to thinking like users, which is the pink stickies, or in this case, purple. And you still have quite a few of them, but this is kind of a big aha moment. We're so used to thinking about people. We're not used to thinking like them. And when you force people to use the words I want or I need coming out of the mouths of the users of a product, you're forcing them to think like their people. The fourth conversation in creating alignment personas is to create quick personas, draft personas. And here's how you do that. You imagine that there's a concierge in the building. Remember the building where everybody's coming to the front door? Well, imagine the concierge is seeing all those people come in all day, every day. And they're hearing all of this sort of wants and needs of the people showing up. If you were going to ask them at the end of a day or a week, what kinds of people are coming into the building and why are they there? The concierge probably could, but probably wouldn't list every single one of those individual wants and needs. They would probably say, well, there's this kind of person and there's this kind of person and there's that kind of person, right? And they might also be able to say, well, if it's this kind of person, I send them over to the first floor. And if it's that kind of person, I send them over to the welcome center. And if it's this kind of person, I send them all the way up to 14, where we have that special department that does whatever, right? You're now going to sort of play the role of this concierge and ask yourself, what are the motivations behind these wants and needs that you've collected? And this is a bit more of an art than a science, but I like to ask people to use words, motivation-based words, which often end with ERS, because it's someone who's doing something, like a seeker, like inspiration seekers, or career builders, or trend seekers, or deep divers, right? So again, we're collecting and grouping sticky notes, but this time under these motivations and these big sort of reasons for being there at that particular moment in time. And then we add names and faces. So for example, for our publication on something specific, maybe on project management or on raising horses or on whatever it is that our specific magazine, our online magazine is covering, there might be Quinn Quickhit, who's an overview seeker looking for an overview of the news. There might be Ian Inspo Seeker, who is seeking like really specific inspiration on a particular topic. A career builder who wants to get a job in this field and really is looking for companies that might be hiring or people that might be people she could follow. Trey Trend Hunter. This is somebody who maybe keeps track of this entire domain and maybe writes articles on it or something and wants to see what are the trends in raising horses or what are the trends in project management. And then Dana Deep Diver. Dana really wants to know some deep information about something specific, some particular topic, and she dives hardcore in. These alignment personas that we just created, these people who embody these motivations behind coming to a product or a site, are hypotheses that we can now go gather data around, because important people in our organization have collaborated to create these alignment personas, capture all the assumptions that exist in an organization. And instead of saying assumptions are worthless, they say assumptions or embedded knowledge, the only way they can hurt your product is if you don't know what they are. So now we brought them all out into the light. We've organized them, we've given them names and faces, and now you can go out there and research. And you know what you might find? You might find that the inspiration seekers don't come to publications like ours. Maybe you'll find data that says everybody seeking inspiration in raising horses is now on Instagram and TikTok. So it's not even worth trying to get them back because they didn't spend that much money anyway. But because you have a place for that data to land, because you have Ian Inspo Seeker right there and you can see him and you know that everybody knows who he is, then your executive team, your stakeholders, whoever was involved in creating these personas can then say, oh, now I get it. And now I'm ready to sort of release those thoughts I had about going after the Ian Inspo Seekers of the world, because I understand the context. The fifth conversation is pick the winners. So now we're looping right back around. Now remember, we captured the goals of for the product or for the business or for whatever it is we're working on. In doing this, what we did, whoever we are, whoever's listening to this, is that we started to speak the language of business in a very respectful way. And we didn't assume that these goals already existed somewhere and were ready to just give us, because most of the time, if you ask for clear business goals, no one has them, but they can't admit they don't have them. So instead of doing that, what I learned very early in my career was, I'll write them down, I'll send the draft, and I'll say, I know I'm wrong. You can feel free to rip them to shreds. Go ahead, because I don't mind looking stupid if the result is that will help the executive team have this conversation and say, clearly, this woman, Tamara, is crazy, but what do we think they should be, right? Because now they can just edit them. So now you have these goals. You know that it's 20%, not 300%. You know that it's 50%, not 5% that everybody's expecting. And you know which goals are the most important. So for example, in times like these, and I'm recording this during COVID times, decreasing subscription cancellations is the number one priority of this company, let's say, because if they don't decrease subscription cancellations, they're going to go out of business before they can achieve any of their other goals. And the business people, the executives, are the ones to define the priorities here. But now that you know that that's critically important, then you ask yourself, if we need to decrease the subscription cancellations by 80% within 6 months, and then closely followed by increase the number of visitors who subscribe by 20%, who do we have to make ridiculously happy? The interesting thing about alignment personas, because they're based on wants and needs, is all of them are going to be relevant for years. These tend to be evergreen, right? Because the wants and needs of people don't change rapidly over time. The way we satisfy those wants and needs, right? That changes pretty fast. Like the fact that now TikTok can satisfy the inspiration needs of people who are interested in raising horses, that's brand new. Right? The need for inspiration, that's going to last forever. So these personas tend to be pretty evergreen, and they're pretty rich resources for us to come up with great design ideas. What changes is the relative priorities of them over time, because the business priorities change over the time. So if we say for right now, who do we need to make ridiculously happy to decrease our subscription cancellations by 80% in the next 6 months, then we can ask the team to give them scores based on that question, right? And typically I give everybody 100 points, and I tell them you can give out points to everybody. You're not allowed to give the same amount of points to any two personas unless it's a 0. and everybody does it wrong the first time, and I yell at them in a gentle way, and then they do it the right way. And what you find here is, if you look at this, for example, in asking to prioritize a persona, Quinn Quick-Hit got a 38 from executive number 3. She came in first. Executive number 4 put her in last. Now you could look at this and freak out, but here's my point. We have done this within a week or 2 of starting this exercise before a single thing has been designed. And the fact that executive 3 and executive 4 radically disagree isn't a problem unless it's not resolved. So now you point out, hey, executive 3, why did you give Quinn a 38? And executive 4, why did you give her a 3? And you let them duke it out, right? And you let them come up with a conclusion, and all the executives can get together and they can talk about it until they come up with a number. Another way you can do it is average it out and let them use those to push back on, which of course you do not want to make any critical business decisions based on an average of anything. But there's lots of ways to, what you've done here is that even though you're lower on the totem pole or coming in from the outside, you have required of the executives to get to the end of a conversation that they've been avoiding, which is, why aren't they aligned around the same key desires and goals for the product and the same users who are going to get them there? Eventually, through conversations like this, you can come up with completed priorities for the personas. And these are priorities, again, that may change in 3 months or 6 months or a year. But if you know that the goal is to reduce subscription cancellations by 80%, and that if and the execs agree, if we don't make Dana and Trey ridiculously happy, we will not hit that goal, because Trey and Dana are our subscribers. Those are the people who we know subscribe to us because they need this information. If we don't keep them ridiculously happy or make them happier in the next 6 months, we're going to lose them as subscribers. And if we do that, we're going to go out of business. And here's my point. Look at this sentence. Look what we've done in this process. In the very beginning, we said what would be really useful to us as designers or whoever, if we knew which customers or users we wanted the execs wanted us to build something for, who they are, what motivates them, what problems they have in their own words, and which ones to focus on. We said if we had that, we could do magical work. Well, look at what we've just done. If we don't make Dana and Trey ridiculously happy, we won't hit our highest priority goals. We did it. We did it. We got important stakeholders together and executives, and through wrangling them through these 5 conversations, we got what we need to design a great product and have it go out the door without turning into a crazy mishmash of weird homepage graphics and language that doesn't make sense to anyone. Alignment is the elusive solution to almost everything. Alignment is how you get to designs that make sense, and to a place where if some executive comes in with some crazy idea that it should look more like Pokemon, you can push back and say, well, how is that going to help Dana and Trey, right? So now, content strategy for all species, trends in content strategy, research portal, build your content career, latest news, mice can read, but only the small print, and some news report about Mickey Mouse. You can get to a result that is designed to delight the people that you know you need to delight in order to have your business thrive. This takes some bravery. It's not super easy to run these workshops, but it is a step-by-step process that you can try. And if you are encouraging and supporting the people in the organization that need to make these decisions to make those decisions, and not assuming that they've already been made, you can really help your entire company get to a point where all the great people they've hired can do their best work. If you're interested in more on this, there's more on adlininc.com. I'm on LinkedIn, and that's where I post a lot. And this is my rabbit, Alfred, wearing his unicorn horn, which I think is probably the most important and relevant way to summarize this. Thanks for joining me today.